The snowstorm hit Lakewood, Colorado on a Tuesday morning, and I was out shoveling my driveway by 7:30, which anyone reasonable would consider pretty early. I had cleared most of my front walkway when I noticed Barbara standing on her porch across the street, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk stalking prey. Barbara Henderson was the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and an attitude that could curdle milk at 50 paces. She wore a puffy North Face jacket that probably cost $600 and held her phone in one hand, already typing something that I knew would ruin my day. I waved at her, trying to be neighborly. She did not wave back. Instead, she marched across the snow-covered street, her boots crunching with each determined step. "Ethan Sanders," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning cold. "Do you realize what time it is?" "Yeah, 7:45, I said, leaning on my shovel. "I am making good progress here. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all walkways must be cleared within 4 hours of snowfall cessation," Barbara said, holding up her phone like it was a legal document. "The snow stopped at 3:15 this morning." I stared at her. "You want me to shovel at 3 in the morning? The rules do not specify when you clear it, only that it must be cleared within the time frame," she replied, her lips pursed. "You are currently 7 hours and 30 minutes past snowfall, which means you are 3 hours and 30 minutes over the limit." "Barbara, that is insane. Nobody shovels at 3 in the morning." "Then perhaps you should start earlier," she said, already typing on her phone. "I am issuing you a fine of $200 for violation of HOA Ordinance 42, Section 3, Paragraph B. You cannot be serious. Completely serious. You will receive the official notice in your email within the hour." She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving me standing there with my mouth hanging open. That was 3 months ago, and it was the beginning of a war I never wanted, but was determined to win. The fines kept coming after that. 2 weeks later, another storm hit, and I was outside by 6 in the morning, shoveling as fast as I could. Barbara appeared at 7:30, claimed I was not moving fast enough, and fined me another $150 for what she called inadequate snow removal pace. I did not even know that was a rule. A month after that, I got fined because there was a patch of ice on my sidewalk that I had not salted thoroughly enough. Never mind that I had used an entire bag of salt on my walkway. Barbara decided it was not sufficient and hit me with a $300 fine. I tried appealing to the HOA board, but Barbara had stacked it with her friends. Deborah, Patricia, and Susan all voted exactly how Barbara told them to vote. The 4 of them ran Pinewood Estates like their personal fiefdom, and they seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting me. "Why me?" I asked my neighbor Marcus, one evening while we stood in his driveway. Marcus was a software engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years. He shook his head sympathetically. "You bought the Hendersons' old house, man. That is the problem." "What do you mean? Barbara's brother lived there before you. He sold it without telling her, moved to Arizona. She was pissed that he did not offer to sell it to her first. She wanted to buy it for her daughter, so now she takes it out on whoever lives there. That is completely unreasonable." "Welcome to the Pinewood Estates HOA," Marcus said. "My advice, keep your head down and do not give her ammunition." But that was not my style. I had spent 4 years in the Army, learned to stand up for myself, and I was not about to let some petty tyrant ruin my life because her feelings were hurt. The breaking point came in January. We got hit with a massive blizzard that dumped 18 inches of snow overnight. I was outside by 5:30 in the morning, working in the dark with a headlamp, shoveling as fast as humanly possible. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that makes your back scream after the first 20 minutes. I worked for 2 solid hours, clearing my driveway and the walkway from my front door to the sidewalk. I was just finishing up when Barbara appeared like some kind of snow demon, bundled up in her expensive coat and holding her phone. "Still not fast enough, Ethan," she said, shaking her head. "The snow stopped at 4:30. You are now past the 4-hour mark." "I started at 5:30. I have been out here in the dark, shoveling non-stop." "The rules do not care when you started, only when you finished," Barbara said. "That will be $400. Something inside me snapped. "You know what, Barbara? Fine me. Add it to the pile, but I am done playing your game." "It is not a game. It is the rules." "Rules you enforce selectively on people you do not like," I shot back. "I notice you have not fined the Martins, and they did not even start shoveling until an hour after me." "The Martins are not your concern." "Right, because they are friends with you." Barbara's face turned red. "Watch your tone, Mr. Sanders. I could fine you for being disrespectful to a board member." "I would love to see you try to make that stick in court." "Court," Barbara laughed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "You think you can win against the HOA? Good luck with that." She walked away, and I stood there in the cold, breathing hard, my hands cramping from gripping the shovel. That evening, I got the email. $400 fine, plus an additional $100 for what Barbara called a hostile attitude toward HOA leadership. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, adding up all the fines I had received over the past 3 months. Nearly $2,000 for shoveling snow in Colorado, where it snows all the time. That was when I decided to do something about it, but I needed to be smart about it. I started by reading every single word of the HOA bylaws. All 63 pages of dense legal language that would put most people to sleep. I read about snow removal requirements, lawn maintenance standards, approved exterior paint colors, and acceptable holiday decorations. I learned that the HOA had the right to fine residents for violations, but that residents also had the right to dispute fines through a formal appeals process. I had already tried that and lost, so I needed a different approach. Then I found something interesting in the property records. The subdivision of Pinewood Estates had been developed in 1998 by a company called Mountain Vista Development. They had built all the houses, installed all the infrastructure, and created the HOA to maintain common areas. But when I dug deeper into the county records, I discovered something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. The sidewalks in Pinewood Estates were not actually owned by the HOA. They were not owned by the city either. According to the original development agreement filed with Jefferson County, the sidewalks were designated as private easements, maintained by the HOA but not technically owned by anyone. The development company had dissolved in 2003, and the property rights to those easements had never been formally transferred, which meant, theoretically, they were up for grabs. I spent the next 2 weeks researching property law, talking to a real estate attorney named Jennifer Wu, and figuring out if what I was thinking was even possible. Jennifer was a sharp woman in her 30s who specialized in property disputes. "So let me get this straight," she said, sitting across from me in her office in downtown Denver. "You want to claim ownership of the sidewalks in your neighborhood?" "Just the section in front of my house," I said. According to the county records, the easement was never transferred to any entity after the development company dissolved. It has been in legal limbo for over 20 years. Jennifer pulled up the documents on her computer, scrolling through pages of legal filings. "This is unusual, very unusual. But you might actually have a case here. The property could potentially be claimed through what is called adverse possession, or, in this case, since it is not being adversely possessed, you could file a petition to claim abandoned property rights. Would it hold up? Maybe. It would cost you some money in legal fees, and the HOA would probably fight it. But if the county agrees that the property rights were never properly transferred, and if you can show that the current situation is creating ambiguity in ownership, you might be able to establish a legal claim. What would that cost me? To file all the paperwork, do the title research, and handle the initial petition? Probably around $3,000. If the HOA challenges it and we have to go to court, it could be more. I thought about all the fines Barbara had hit me with, all the harassment, all the petty tyranny. $3,000 was a lot of money, but the principle was worth it. Plus, if I succeeded, I would have leverage over the HOA instead of the other way around. Let's do it, I said. Jennifer filed the petition with Jefferson County in mid-February. The process involved submitting detailed property surveys, historical documents about the development, and legal arguments about abandoned property rights. The county had to review everything, which Jennifer warned could take weeks or even months. In the meantime, I kept shoveling my snow exactly as before, and Barbara kept fining me. She seemed to take even more pleasure in it now, as if she could sense I was up to something and wanted to punish me preemptively. "Another fine, Ethan," she said cheerfully one morning in late February. $300 for inadequate ice removal. I salted yesterday. Not enough, apparently. Mrs. Chen said she nearly slipped. Mrs. Chen did not walk past my house. She lives on the other side of the subdivision. Barbara just smiled. The fine stands. I smiled back, looking forward to the formal notice. That seemed to puzzle her, but she walked away without another word. In early March, I got the call from Jennifer. "You are not going to believe this, Ethan. The county approved your petition." I nearly dropped my phone. "They what?" "They reviewed the title history and agreed that the sidewalk easements were never properly transferred after Mountain Vista Development dissolved. Since no entity has claimed legal ownership in over 20 years, and since you are the adjacent property owner, they have granted you the right to file for formal ownership through a quiet title action." What does that mean in English? It means you can go to court and ask a judge to declare you the legal owner of the sidewalk in front of your property. The county is not opposing it, which is huge. Now the question is whether anyone else will oppose it. The HOA will, probably. But here is the thing, the HOA will have to prove they own it, and according to every document we have found, they do not. They have an easement to maintain it, but maintenance rights are not the same as ownership. So when do we go to court? I will file the quiet title action this week. Then we wait for any objections. If the HOA wants to fight it, they will have 30 days to respond. The HOA responded in 24 hours. I got a cease and desist letter from their attorney, a guy named Richard Pemberton who worked for a firm in Lakewood. The letter was full of legal threats and demands that I withdraw my claim immediately. I forwarded it to Jennifer, who laughed when she called me back. This is exactly what I expected. They are panicking because they know they do not have a strong case. Let me handle Pemberton. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer and Richard exchanged increasingly tense letters. Richard argued that the HOA had maintained the sidewalks for over 20 years, and therefore had established ownership through adverse possession. Jennifer countered that maintenance duties did not equal ownership, and that the HOA had never filed any claim of ownership with the county. In mid-April, we had our court date. I took the day off from my job at the construction company, where I worked as a project manager, and drove to the Jefferson County Courthouse in Golden. Jennifer met me outside, carrying a briefcase full of documents. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I will ever be." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Judge Patricia Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who looked like she had seen every property dispute imaginable. Barbara was there with Richard Pemberton, along with two other HOA board members, Deborah and Susan. They all glared at me as I sat down. Judge Morrison called the case and asked Jennifer to present our argument. Jennifer laid out the history of the development, the dissolution of Mountain Vista Development, and the lack of any formal ownership transfer for the sidewalk easements. She presented county records, surveys, and legal precedents. Richard Pemberton argued that the HOA had functioned as the de facto owner for over 20 years, maintaining and managing the sidewalks, and that allowing my claim would create chaos in property rights across the subdivision. Judge Morrison asked several pointed questions about why the HOA had never filed for formal ownership if they believed they owned the sidewalks. Richard did not have a good answer. After an hour of arguments, Judge Morrison said she would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. I kept going to work, kept shoveling snow when it fell, and tried not to think about the fact that I had spent over $5,000 on legal fees at this point. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, Jennifer called me. "We won." "We what?" Judge Morrison ruled in your favor. She agreed that the property rights were never properly transferred and that you, as the adjacent property owner, have the right to claim ownership of the sidewalk easement in front of your property. "The title is yours, Ethan." I sat down hard in my office chair. "I own the sidewalk." "You own the sidewalk. Congratulations." I could hear the smile in her voice. "What happens now? Now you decide what you want to do with it. It is your property. You can maintain it, you can charge people to use it, you can do whatever you want within the bounds of easement law." "Can I charge the HOA to use it?" Jennifer laughed. "Technically, yes. If they want access to perform maintenance or if they want to enforce any rules about it, they would need your permission. You could even charge them a licensing fee." That was when the idea hit me. "Jennifer, can you draft up a licensing agreement?" "What kind of licensing agreement?" "One that charges the HOA a monthly fee to access my sidewalk for enforcement purposes." There was a pause. "Ethan, that is deliciously petty. I love it. Yes, I can draft that up." "How much do you want to charge?" I thought about all the fines Barbara had hit me with. $500 a month. Done. I will have it ready by tomorrow. The next day, I had Jennifer deliver the licensing agreement to Barbara personally. I wished I could have been there to see her face, but Jennifer said it was better to keep things professional. Barbara called me that evening. Her voice was tight with rage. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Ethan?" "I am managing my property, Barbara." "Just like you have been managing HOA property for years." "That sidewalk is not your property." Judge Morrison disagrees. "I have the title right here. It is mine, fair and square." "This is outrageous. You cannot just claim ownership of a public sidewalk." "It is not a public sidewalk. It is a private easement, and now I own it. If the HOA wants to continue accessing it to enforce snow removal rules or anything else, you will need to pay the licensing fee. $500 a month is highway robbery." "Funny, I seem to remember you charging me about that much in fines over the past few months. Seems fair to me." Barbara sputtered for a moment. "The board will never agree to this. That is your choice. But if you or anyone from the HOA steps on my sidewalk without a valid license, I will consider it trespassing and call the police." I hung up before she could respond. Over the next week, the HOA scrambled to figure out what to do. According to Marcus, who gleefully reported all the neighborhood gossip, Barbara called an emergency board meeting. The board consulted with Richard Pemberton, who apparently told them they did not have many options. The judge's ruling was clear, and appealing it would cost tens of thousands of dollars with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, I started enjoying my new property rights. I put up a small sign on the sidewalk that read, "Private property of Ethan Sanders, HOA access by license only." It was petty, but it felt good. Barbara tried a different approach. She came to my door one evening without her phone for once, looking almost contrite. "Ethan, can we talk?" "Neighbor to neighbor." "Sure," I said, not inviting her in. "This situation has gotten out of hand. I understand you were upset about the fines, but this is affecting the entire community. People do not know if they can even walk on the sidewalk in front of your house anymore. Residents can walk on it all they want. I am not charging residents. I am charging the HOA for enforcement access. $500 a month is unreasonable. So were all those fines you hit me with for shoveling snow?" Barbara's facade of friendliness cracked. "You know what your problem is, Ethan. You do not understand how communities work. We have rules for a reason. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, this neighborhood would fall apart. And if one person abuses their power to punish people they do not like, that is okay. I never abused my power. You fine me for not shoveling fast enough at 3 in the morning, Barbara. You fine me for having a hostile attitude. You made my life miserable because I bought a house your brother sold without asking your permission. Do not stand here and tell me you were just enforcing rules." Barbara's face turned red. "Fine. You want to play hardball? We will play hardball. The HOA will make your life hell. You already tried that. Now I have leverage, so good luck with that." She stormed off, and I went back inside, feeling simultaneously vindicated and exhausted. The next week, Barbara tried to fine me for having an unauthorized sign on my property. I pointed out that the sign was on my sidewalk, which was my property, and she had no jurisdiction over it. She tried to fine me anyway. I sent her a bill for $500 for accessing my property to inspect the sign without a valid license. This went back and forth for another 2 weeks. Barbara would try some new tactic. I would counter it, and the neighborhood watched like it was the best reality TV show ever made. Then things escalated in a way I did not expect. One morning in early May, I came outside to find that someone had spray-painted obscenities on my sidewalk. Bright red paint spelling out words I would not repeat, clearly visible from the street. I immediately called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes, took photos, and wrote up a report. Vandalism, they said. Probably teenagers, but they would investigate. I had a different suspicion. I checked my security camera, which I had installed a few months earlier after the fines started piling up. The footage showed a figure in dark clothing approaching my sidewalk around 2 in the morning, spray painting the obscenities, and then running off. The figure was not a teenager. It was an adult woman, and while the video quality was not perfect in the dark, I could make out blonde highlights reflecting in the streetlight. I showed the footage to the police officers. They asked me if I knew who it was. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, "but I do not want to accuse anyone without being sure." "We will need to investigate further," one officer said. "Can you send us a copy of this footage?" "Absolutely." Over the next few days, the police interviewed neighbors. Several people reported seeing Barbara walking her dog late at night, which was unusual because she normally walked it in the morning. One neighbor, an elderly man named George, said he had seen Barbara near my house around 2 in the morning the night of the vandalism. The police brought Barbara in for questioning. I do not know exactly what happened in that conversation, but Marcus told me she came home looking shaken. A week later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Williams of the Lakewood Police Department. "Mr. Sanders, I wanted to let you know that we have concluded our investigation into the vandalism of your property. And we have charged Barbara Henderson with criminal mischief and trespassing. The video evidence you provided, combined with witness statements, gave us enough for charges. She will be arraigned next month." I sat down trying to process this. She actually did it. She actually vandalized my property. "Appears so. I will be honest with you, Mr. Sanders. This whole HOA situation seems to have gotten out of hand. You might want to consider some kind of resolution before things get worse. I have been trying to resolve it. Barbara is the one who keeps escalating. I understand. Just be careful. Property disputes can bring out the worst in people." The news spread through Pinewood Estates like wildfire. Barbara Henderson, the HOA president, had been charged with vandalizing a resident's property. The board held another emergency meeting, this time without Barbara, who had been forced to step down pending the resolution of the criminal charges. Deborah took over as interim president, and to my surprise, she called me a few days later. "Ethan, this is Deborah Martinez from the HOA board. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure." "I want to apologize on behalf of the board for how things have been handled. Looking back at the records, it is clear that you were targeted unfairly. The fines you received were excessive and inappropriate. I was not expecting this. Thank you for saying that. We would like to reach a settlement. The board has agreed to refund all the fines you have paid over the past several months, plus an additional amount to cover your legal fees. In exchange, we would ask that you withdraw the licensing fee requirement for the sidewalk." "How much are we talking?" "We are prepared to offer you $15,000. That covers your fines, your legal costs, and compensation for the harassment you endured." $15,000. That was more than I had spent on legal fees and fines combined. It was tempting, but I hesitated. "What about Barbara?" "Barbara has resigned from the board effective immediately. She will no longer have any role in HOA operations. Additionally, we are revising our enforcement policies to prevent this kind of targeted harassment in the future." "Who else is on the board now?" "Myself, Patricia, and Susan. But we are also opening up 2 positions for election next month. We want more community involvement and oversight." "I want to be on the board," I said suddenly. There was a pause. "That is an interesting request. If I am going to accept this settlement, I want a seat at the table to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I will run in the election, and I want the board's support." Deborah was quiet for a moment. "Let me talk to the others. Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Sure." The next day, Deborah called back with an answer. "We have discussed your request and we agree. The board will not oppose your candidacy, and we will support reforms to the enforcement policies. Do we have a deal? One more thing. The settlement needs to include a formal apology from the HOA in writing, acknowledging that I was unfairly targeted, and it needs to be sent to every resident in Pinewood Estates." Done. We had a deal. The settlement was finalized in early June. I received a check for $15,000, along with a formal letter of apology that was mailed to all 237 households in Pinewood Estates. The letter explained that Ethan Sanders had been subjected to unfair and excessive enforcement actions by the previous board president, and that the HOA was taking steps to ensure such behavior would not happen again. The response from the neighborhood was overwhelming. I had neighbors I had never spoken to before stopping me on the street to shake my hand. People told me stories of their own run-ins with Barbara, fines they had paid just to avoid conflict, rules they thought were ridiculous, but never challenged. Marcus threw a barbecue in my honor, inviting half the subdivision. "To Ethan," he said, raising a beer, "the man who took on the HOA and won." Everyone cheered, and for the first time since I had moved to Pinewood Estates, I felt like I was actually part of a community. The election was held in July. I ran for one of the open board positions, and so did 3 other residents, including a retired teacher named Helen and a young lawyer named David. We all gave speeches at the annual HOA meeting about our visions for the community. I kept mine simple. I believe HOAs should serve residents, not control them. I believe rules should be enforced fairly and reasonably. And I believe that when someone in power abuses that power, they should be held accountable. If you elect me, I promise to work for all of us, not just the people in charge. I won by a landslide. Barbara's criminal case went to trial in August. I attended the hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as the prosecutor presented the evidence. The video from my security camera was damning, and Barbara's lawyer could not offer any credible defense. She pled guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 6 months probation, a $1,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. As she left the courtroom, she glanced at me. I expected to see anger or hatred, but instead she just looked tired and defeated. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My first board meeting as an elected member was in September. Deborah, Patricia, Susan, Helen, and I sat around a conference table in the community center, going through the agenda. "First order of business," Deborah said. "We need to review and revise the snow removal ordinance. Ethan, would you like to propose something?" I had spent weeks working on this. "I propose we change the requirement from 4 hours to 24 hours, and we eliminate any subjective language about pace or adequacy. As long as a resident clears their sidewalk within 24 hours of snowfall ending, they are in compliance. No exceptions, no interpretations, no room for abuse." "That seems reasonable," Helen said. "Do we have a second?" "Seconded," David said. The motion passed unanimously. We spent the next few months reforming other rules. We eliminated fines for minor infractions, created an appeals process with actual oversight, and instituted term limits for board members. We also created a transparency policy requiring all HOA actions to be documented and available for residents to review. The change in the neighborhood was palpable. People seemed happier, less stressed. There were fewer complaints, fewer conflicts, and more community events. We organized a fall festival, a holiday lights contest, and a neighborhood watch program that actually brought people together instead of turning them into informants. In November, I got a letter in the mail from Barbara. It was handwritten, which surprised me. "Dear Ethan," it read, "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I want to apologize for how I treated you. I let my anger and pride turn me into someone I am not proud of. You were right to stand up to me, and I hope you can use your position on the board to make Pinewood Estates a better place. Sincerely, Barbara Henderson." I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I was not sure if I forgave her, but I appreciated the gesture. As winter approached and the first snow of the season began to fall, I found myself outside at a reasonable hour, shoveling my driveway without stress or anxiety. My sidewalk, which I had since granted the HOA free access to in perpetuity as part of the settlement, was clear and safe. Marcus came over to help and we worked together, talking about football and weekend plans and all the normal things neighbors talk about. "You know," Marcus said, leaning on his shovel, "this neighborhood is a lot better now. You really changed things." "We all changed things," I said. "I just got the ball rolling. Still, man, You took on the HOA and won. That is legendary, I laughed. I just wanted to shovel my snow in peace. And now you can. As I finished clearing the last section of my driveway, I looked around the neighborhood. Other people were out shoveling too, at their own pace, without fear of immediate fines or harassment. Lights were on in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and everything felt peaceful. I had bought a house in Pinewood Estates looking for a quiet place to live after years of chaos in the army. I had not expected to end up in a war with my HOA, and I certainly had not expected to win. But sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when it is expensive, even when everyone tells you to just keep your head down. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, blanketing everything in white. I went inside, made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood I had helped transform. The sidewalk in front of my house, the one I had fought so hard for, was just a sidewalk again. No signs, no licensing fees, no drama. Just a piece of concrete connecting my home to the community around me, exactly as it should be. And for the first time since I had moved to Colorado, I felt like I was truly home. The following spring brought new challenges and opportunities for the HOA board. We had established a solid foundation of fair enforcement and community engagement, but there was still work to do. The neighborhood pool needed renovations, several streets required repaving, and we had to plan the annual budget without gouging residents with excessive fees. During one particularly long board meeting in April, we were reviewing proposals from contractors for the pool renovation when Patricia brought up an interesting point. You know, we have been so focused on fixing problems that we have not really thought about what we want this community to be, she said. What is our vision for Pinewood Estates? It was a good question, and it sparked a conversation that lasted well past the scheduled end time of the meeting. We talked about creating more green spaces, adding a community garden, improving the playground equipment, and maybe even building a small dog park. These all cost money, Susan pointed out, always the practical one. They do, I agreed. But if we are smart about it and get resident input, we might be surprised how willing people are to invest in improvements they actually want. We decided to hold a town hall meeting to get community feedback. I volunteered to organize it, and we set a date for early May. The town hall was held in the community center on a warm Saturday afternoon. I was nervous about turnout, but I should not have been. Over 100 residents showed up, filling every chair and lining the walls. I stood at the front of the room with the other board members and welcomed everyone. Thank you all for coming. We wanted to create a space where everyone can share ideas about how to make Pinewood Estates an even better place to live. This is your community, and we want to hear from you. The ideas came flooding in. Someone suggested movie nights in the park during summer. Another person wanted better lighting on the walking trails. A young mother asked about adding more benches near the playground. An elderly couple proposed a community newsletter to keep everyone informed. We took notes on everything, and at the end of the meeting, we had pages of suggestions and a real sense of excitement about the future. One resident, a woman named Carol who lived 3 streets over, approached me as people were leaving. I just want to say thank you, Ethan. This is what an HOA should be. You made us remember that we are a community, not just a collection of houses following rules. Her words stuck with me over the summer. We implemented several of the suggestions. We organized monthly movie nights, partnered with a local landscaping company to add more flowers and benches throughout the neighborhood, and launched a simple email newsletter that Helen volunteered to manage. The dog park idea gained the most traction. We found an unused corner of common space near the back of the subdivision, and I worked with David, who had experience with municipal projects, to design a layout. We presented it to residents in July, and after some discussion about costs and maintenance, we held a vote. The measure passed with 78% approval. Construction on the dog park began in August. It was not huge, maybe half an acre, but it had separate areas for large and small dogs, benches for owners, and plenty of shade trees. Residents volunteered to help with the landscaping, and local businesses donated materials. The grand opening was in early October, right as the leaves were starting to turn golden. We had a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and about 50 people showed up with their dogs. It was chaotic and joyful, with dogs running everywhere and people laughing and chatting. Marcus brought his golden retriever, Bailey, who immediately made friends with every dog in the park. "This is awesome, man," he said, watching Bailey chase after a tennis ball. "I cannot believe this is the same neighborhood that was fining you for shoveling too slow a year ago." "People are not bad," I said. "Systems can be bad. People just need the chance to do better." That is surprisingly philosophical for a guy who threatened to charge the HOA trespassing fees. I laughed. I contain multitudes. As fall turned to winter and snow returned to Colorado, I found myself in a completely different situation than the previous year. The revised snow removal ordinance was working well. People had 24 hours to clear their sidewalks, which was reasonable, and enforcement was consistent and fair. No one was getting fined for not shoveling fast enough because that was no longer a thing. The first major snowstorm of the season hit in late November. I was outside shoveling around noon, taking my time, when I noticed someone struggling with their driveway across the street. It was an older man named Frank who had moved in a few months earlier. I finished my own driveway and walked over. "Hey Frank, want some help?" He looked relieved. "I would appreciate that, Ethan. This snow is heavier than I expected." We worked together for the next hour, clearing his driveway and walkway. When we finished, he invited me in for hot chocolate, and we sat in his kitchen talking about his career as an engineer and his grandkids who lived in Texas. That became a pattern throughout the winter. When it snowed, neighbors helped each other. Marcus and I developed a system where we would clear the driveways of elderly residents who could not do it themselves. Other people joined in, and before long, we had an informal snow removal team. It was everything an HOA should encourage but rarely does. In February, we had another board meeting to discuss the upcoming elections. My term was not up yet, but Deborah had decided not to run again. She wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren and felt good about leaving the board in capable hands. "We need to make sure we elect people who will continue this positive direction," she said. "The last thing I want is for someone like Barbara to take over again." "We have safeguards now," Helen reminded her. "The new bylaws prevent any one person from having too much power. And the transparency requirements mean residents will know what is happening." "Still," Deborah said, "we should encourage good candidates to run." I had someone in mind. George, the elderly neighbor who had witnessed Barbara's late-night walk, had been increasingly involved in community events. He was thoughtful, fair-minded, and had a way of bringing people together. I approached him after a neighborhood meeting in March. "George, have you ever thought about running for the HOA board?" He seemed surprised. "Me? I am 72 years old, Ethan. So?" "You are sharp, you care about the community, and people respect you. We need someone like you." "I do not know if I would be any good at it." "You would be great at it. Just think about it." He did think about it, and a week later he told me he would run. 2 other residents also announced their candidacy, both of whom seemed reasonable and community-minded. The election in April was uneventful in the best way possible. All three candidates gave speeches. Residents voted, and George won along with a woman named Rita who worked as a nurse and had great ideas about community health and safety initiatives. The new board held its first meeting in May, and the energy was positive. We reviewed the budget, discussed upcoming projects, and talked about ways to continue improving the community. One item on the agenda caught my attention. "We have received a request from Barbara Henderson," Rita said, reading from a document. "She is asking permission to attend board meetings as a resident observer. She says she wants to see how the community has changed and learn from what we are doing." Everyone looked at me. "What do you think, Ethan?" George asked. I considered it. Barbara had served her probation, completed her community service, and by all accounts had been keeping a low profile for over a year. Did she deserve a second chance to be involved, even just as an observer? "I think we should allow it," I said. "Our meetings are supposed to be open to residents anyway. If she wants to attend and observe, she is welcome to." "Are you sure?" Helen asked. "After everything she did, I am sure. People can change, and if she does try to cause problems, we have systems in place to handle it." The board agreed, and we sent Barbara a response letting her know she was welcome to attend. She showed up at the next meeting in June, sitting quietly in the back row. She did not speak, did not interrupt, just listened and took notes. When the meeting ended, she approached me. "Thank you for letting me come," she said quietly. "I know I do not deserve it." "Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow," I said. "Just remember that the community is not here to serve the HOA. The HOA is here to serve the community." "I understand that now." I wish I had understood it before. She continued attending meetings throughout the summer, and slowly, cautiously, some residents began talking to her again. I watched her interacting with people at the fall festival, helping set up tables and hand out food, and I realized she really had changed. In September, she approached the board with a proposal. "I know I can never undo the harm I caused, but I would like to do something positive. I want to start a conflict resolution program for the HOA. Teach people how to address disputes before they escalate, provide mediation services, that kind of thing." We discussed it as a board and agreed it was a good idea, with one condition. Barbara could not be the sole person running it. It needed to be a team effort with oversight. She agreed without hesitation. The program launched in October and was surprisingly successful. Several residents went through the training, and we had volunteer mediators available to help with neighbor disputes. It did not eliminate all conflicts, but it gave people tools to resolve issues without the HOA having to step in with fines and threats. By the time winter rolled around again, Pinewood Estates had transformed into something I never imagined when I first bought my house. We were not perfect. We still had disagreements and problems and the occasional difficult resident, but we had built something real, a community that actually cared about its members. On a cold December evening, I was sitting in my living room when I got a text from Marcus. "Impromptu gathering at my place. Hot cocoa and cookies. You in?" I bundled up and walked over to find about 15 neighbors crowded into Marcus's living room, laughing and talking. Kids were playing in the basement. Adults were exchanging stories about holiday shopping and year-end work stress. And someone had brought homemade gingerbread cookies that were absolutely incredible. As I stood there with a mug of hot chocolate, watching people who had become genuine friends, I thought about everything that had happened since that first fine from Barbara. The anger, the legal battles, the painted obscenities on my sidewalk, the stress of fighting an entire HOA board. It had all led to this moment, this community, these relationships. Later that night, as I walked home through the quiet, snow-dusted streets, I passed the sidewalk that had started everything. The sidewalk I had technically owned for a brief period, the piece of concrete that had become a symbol of standing up against injustice. It was just a sidewalk again, cleared of snow, connecting homes and neighbors and lives, and that was exactly how it should be. I reached my front door and looked back at the neighborhood one more time. Lights glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and everything was peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and smiled.